So since Shopify Plus is trying to get you to the conclusion that if I want an agile enterprise e-commerce software provider, e-commerce as well as omni-channel, I should add, then I should migrate to Shopify Plus and that can happen quickly. So since they're making an argument, what I'd like to do is analyze how they've structured the content using one of the kings of frameworks. And the kings of frameworks tend to be management consultants who are perhaps most epitomized by McKinsey. And what I'm doing is I'm borrowing some content here from this YouTube video, and I want to give credit. So it's PowerPoint storytelling like McKinsey, Bain, and BCG strategy consultants. And you can check this out for yourself. So this person is analyzing how McKinsey does presentations. This is how they convince their clients to go with their recommendation, which is essentially what you're doing with a business-to-business website. And there are three critical flows that are happening here when they do presentations. The first is the vertical flow. So what McKinsey does is on any given slide, they have the title of the slide, which is a sentence or two, and it's the conclusion. It's a point that they're making. The rest of the slide is the proof that proves the point that is in the title. Now, this is very different from how a lot of people make presentations. Often the title is something like introduction, or it's just sort of a generic category. But McKinsey doesn't really do that. What they do with the title is the conclusion. The title is the argument. The rest of the content is the proof. And we see that throughout Shopify Plus's website is the headlines, the titles, are the conclusion that they want you to come to, and then the content reinforces that conclusion. Okay, so that's like an individual section or an individual page. But then we get to think about how the pages come together. Now, when management consultants do it, it's in a slideshow, but you can easily transfer the same logic, the same structure to how you organize the content on a website. So the deck or the presentation, it tells a story. And often that story is something like, this is the current situation. This is what's going to happen in the future. And that's why we recommend doing this. So it's kind of like a three components to the story. And we'll take a look later about how Shopify Plus does this and how McKinsey does it as well. Okay, so there's the vertical flow, which is like individual sections. There's the horizontal flow, which is how the sections are connected. And then there's the overall flow, the stuff that's sort of embedded in everything. And that is using what they call a pyramid principle and MECE, which I'm not going to talk about for this particular slide. Okay, so let's talk about the pyramid principle. Pyramid principle, which I'm borrowing here from Strategy U, is the top of the pyramid being the main takeaway. Okay, this is the central point that you're trying to argue, and then you have various points to support it. Okay, so there's like, here's one reason to believe this, here's another reason why you need to believe this, here's a third reason why you need to believe this, and if you don't believe this point, well, here's some research to support it, here's some data, here's a case study, etc. Similarly, with this argument, here's more data points to convince you of this main takeaway. Now, one of the reasons that I'd like to use McKinsey is because when you're doing business-to-business marketing, you're trying to convince often executives, educated, very analytical, very logical types of people. And the kings of business-to-business persuasion, the people that are able to persuade the most difficult to persuade people, these Fortune 500 CEOs, is McKinsey. McKinsey is the go-to consultants that influence strategy in large business-to-business companies. So it epitomizes the appropriate structure for the most extreme examples of business-to-business. Now, you can water that down a bit if you're dealing with SMB, if you're catering to solopreneurs, but if we use this as kind of a North Star or an ideal to aspire towards, then we can simplify along the way. But let's start here. Let's start with this pyramid principle. So the main takeaway, if we're thinking about this in terms of McKinsey, for Shopify Plus, is that Shopify is agile. And agile implies different things, right? Speed, ability to adopt quickly, to make adjustments, to implement things without a lot of expenses and a lot of delays, without a lot of politics, that sort of thing. And some of the reasons that they support this takeaway is they use things like, we have pre-built automation templates, things that you don't need to build from scratch, things you don't need to do very elaborate integrations with. You don't need to go through a lot of Q&A because Shopify Plus has already pre-built this stuff. Okay, another reason to support this argument is that legacy software takes too long to install. And a third point is that migration can happen in 90 days. And you see throughout the website, Shopify Plus does an excellent job of using very specifics, tangible things. 90 days, 1 hour, 99.9% uptime. It's not just kind of vague, quickly or guaranteed. Here's the specific guarantee. Here is the specific promise. And that makes this main takeaway much more believable. Okay, so now let's talk about the horizontal flow. How do these various sections connect to each other? And we see this example here where perhaps your first section of slides might be, it was the best of times. And then your next cluster of slides might be, it was the worst of times. And then the third cluster is, it was the age of wisdom. So this is like the liberation from this problem. So things were good, they got really bad, but don't worry, we can get you back to your promised land from before. And so throughout the titles of your sections tells this story. It shows you sort of this movement towards this promised outcome. And we see this used in the Shopify Plus website. So for example, if we just look at the homepage, they have this section, this headline that says, legacy enterprise software is broken. Okay, there's a problem. There's a fundamental flaw in what you've been doing. And because of that, the world of e-commerce is changing, and it's time to change with it. So things are bad, people are moving. Oh, but don't worry, there's this age of wisdom. Experience the power of an entire platform behind you. Sell everywhere, manage complexity, integrate systems. So we're sort of starting with this high-level assessment of what the current situation is with enterprise software. And then we're talking high level about how there's movement, things are shifting. And then we're getting into the specifics. We're getting into the functional details about how you liberate you from this problem. And that's the overall story that Shopify Plus wants you to take away. That's kind of the horizontal flow that's happening in the content strategy. So we talked about the pyramid principle, which is the kind of the overall takeaway and how they're building that argument for agility. Then we talked about the horizontal flow of the website, which is sort of telling the story. And then at the micro level, what we're talking about is the vertical flow. It's the conclusion they want you to draw in any given section. So I just took this particular section of the website, and the conclusion they want you to come to is that legacy enterprise software is broken. And they're using this cute little text effect to show how things are breaking. And then the body text is supporting this conclusion. So this is very similar to how a management consultant would build a slide. The top of the slide is this conclusion, and then the data, the bullets, everything below it kind of feeds into this. So why is enterprise software broken? Because you need thousands of days to install software. You need an army of developers to support it. And you need millions of dollars to run it. So this body copy feeds into the headline, the conclusion they want you to draw. Here's the reasons to believe that conclusion.